Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar training on pressuring Congress to end workplace harassment. Thank you so much for hopping on this training call today. We've got folks from all over the country, from Maryland and California and Ohio and Illinois and lots of other places in between. We're all really excited to get a chance to talk with you about a brand new bill that's being introduced in Congress next week that's going to be a huge step forward in tackling workplace harassment. And we know that many of you are very busy and have lots going on in your lives, so we really do appreciate you taking the next hour out of your day and spending it with us. We promise to be concise and efficient. Before we officially get started, I just want to make sure that, again, you've all not only joined this conference call line and that you can hear us on your phone, but that you've also joined the visual interface portion of the training from your computer so that you can see the slides as we move through them. For those of you who are just joining, the way to view the presentation slides is by going to one of the reminder emails. You should have received one from Ultraviolet a couple hours ago. And from a computer, click the screen sharing link in step 3, type in your name on the next page, and click Join Meeting. And if you've done that correctly, you should see a teal background that says Pressuring Congress to End Workplace Harassment, which is the title of today's training. And if you can't join the screen share interface for whatever reason, if it's not working for you, don't worry about it. Tomorrow we will be sending you all a video recording of today's presentation, as well as a link to the slides. So if you've missed something for whatever reason, you'll be able to go back and look at it again later. All right, so let's go over the agenda for our training today. First, we'll start out just by doing some brief introductions of the trainers on this call. Second, we will move into some background information and talk about the lay of the land. Third will be a section on what's actually in this brand new bill to end workplace harassment. Our fourth section will cover the timeline and legislative process for how we'll win. And finally, we'll talk about some specific things that each of you can do over the upcoming April recess to help move this brand new bill forward before wrapping up and taking some questions. And with that, let's hop into introductions. So I'll go ahead and start. My name is Ryan Rastigar. I'm the Deputy Field Director here at Ultraviolet. So basically my job is to support Ultraviolet members in taking action offline and organizing to fight for women's rights and equality in your home districts. So whether that's by showing up at your representative's office for a meeting or organizing a local protest or anything in between, basically, if you've ever led an offline action in your community with Ultraviolet over the past couple of years, then I've probably talked to you at some point or another, either over the phone or maybe over email. And next, I will pass it off to Emma.
Cool. Thanks, Ryan. Hey, everyone. My name's Emma Borbor. I'm the Deputy Organizing Director at Ultraviolet. I help develop and run Ultraviolet's campaigns, and really what's most relevant for this call is I lead our work to end rape culture. So that includes legislative work like this to curb gender-based violence and our work to change culture to one that believes survivors and stops enabling violence. And Diana, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Diana Ramirez. I'm the Senior Policy Advocate at the Restaurant Opportunity Center United, or ROC United. We're a nonprofit restaurant workers center, and we're focused on improving the working conditions in the restaurant industry. And I think what's unique about ROC is that there are other organizations based on food sourcing and ethical practices, and we're one of the only nonprofit that focuses on the labor part of the food chain. So it's important to us because the restaurant industry is the largest industry in the country with 14 million workers, and it's the second largest private sector employer. So my job at ROC is to focus on promoting gender, racial, and economic justice in the restaurant industry.
All right, thank you so much. So we are your trainers on the call today. Again, we're all super excited to talk to you about this new bill being introduced in Congress next week to curb workplace harassment, and then just talk about some super easy things that you can do to get in on this fight early and make this piece of legislation a reality. And so with that, I will pass it back to Emma, who's going to talk about some background info.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So to start this section off, we want to actually do a quick poll because we know a lot of folks are interested in this work because it comes from real life experience. To do this poll, you can press 1 on your phone. So press 1 if you've ever been in a job where there wasn't enough being done to prevent and respond to workplace harassment. So again, you can press 1 on your phone now if you think your workplace, either a current place that you work or maybe one that you've worked at in the past, could be doing more to prevent and respond to harassment. So, and when we say harassment, that could be sexual harassment, like comments that make you feel uncomfortable or unwanted advances, or that could be other forms of harassment like racist comments, homophobia in the workplace, or derogatory comments about people with disabilities. So it looks like a good chunk of folks have responded, and that 52% of people have answered yes to this question, and that really tracks with what we've been seeing over the last year and a half. Millions of people have spoken out about sexual harassment, and a light has been shown on harassment in the workplace generally. And now really is our chance to change those workplaces that you guys were thinking of when you answered that question. So if we can go to the next slide. These days are obviously there's so many big problems to tackle, and I'm actually excited that I get to kick off this call with a political opportunity in front of us. Ever since a certain man bragged about sexually assaulting women and then won the presidency, our country has finally started to confront the epidemic of sexual violence that is happening across the country. With the explosion of Me Too, survivors of harassment and sexual violence bravely shared their experiences, further exposing that sexual violence pervades every part of our society, from our homes to our schools to our workplaces. And dozens of abusers and their enablers have been held accountable over the last year and a half. And it was really amidst this cultural reckoning that in 2018, women mobilized, ran for office, voted, and won in record numbers. Democrats won back the House of Representatives for the first time since 2010. And this gives us more of an opportunity to actually introduce progressive legislation and bold ideas. So right now, we're finally in a position to go beyond exposing the problem of sexual harassment and start to cement some big changes that will stop harassment and sexual violence. So the first place we think there's a lot of potential for big structural changes to curb harassment and sexual violence is in the workplace. And that's the focus of the call today. So advocates and leaders in Congress have been crafting a bill that will be the gold standard legislation for taking on workplace harassment. Essentially, it includes the changes that people really need and will ensure everyone can work with safety and dignity. Over the last year, we have made huge strides in how seriously harassment is being taken, and way more people feel empowered to speak out about it and report the harassment that they experience. But the reality is our laws are lagging behind our culture. Most workplaces still have what we would call a check the boxes approach that basically just covers the company from legal liability rather than encouraging safe workplaces. We have the opportunity right now to push for changes that will actually prevent harassment from happening in the first place and make sure accountability happens when harassment does take place. In particular, women in low-wage jobs, and the majority of those women are women of color, Indigenous women, and immigrant women, are the most vulnerable to sexual harassment. So the bill we're discussing on this call, part of the reason that makes it the gold standard is because it starts with changing the rules that make women in low-wage industries particularly vulnerable, and that makes us all safer. And this bill that we're talking about is going to be introduced this upcoming Tuesday, April 9th. We'll be able to send you the name of the bill. You'll hear it. We're just referring to it as the bill, but we'll send you even more information when the bill is actually introduced. Next, what we're going to talk about today is basically the big problems and the major solutions that the bill tackles. And really the bottom line is that we have a huge opportunity to cement the discussions that have been happening around Me Too over the last year and a half into lasting policy change. So for the next section, we're going to go over the major solutions in the bill, and I'm first going to, and to start us off on that, I'm going to pass it over to Diana.
Okay. So one of the major solutions that is included in the bill is what we tip worker advocates call one fair wage. For those of you who have worked at restaurants and get tips, or maybe not just restaurants, but car wash workers, nail salon workers, massage therapists, if you receive tips, then you know that your employer gets to pay you a lower wage, and you have to make up the difference in tips. That is called the subminimum wage for tipped workers. And one of the solutions in the bill is to require employers to pay all their workers the full minimum wage, and you get to keep your tips, so that everyone's making one fair minimum wage for everyone, regardless of your occupation. So the bill would have one fair wage. And for us, that's very important because, like I mentioned earlier, the restaurant industry is the largest most tip workers are in the restaurant industry. And that's the largest industry in our country with 14 million workers, and it's the second largest private sector employer. It's also the number one fastest growing private sector employer. So 1 in 11 American workers currently works in restaurants. 1 in 2 Americans has worked in the industry at some point in our lifetime. However, it's the lowest paying industry. The U.S. Department of Labor reports, under Obama, not under this presidency, but under Obama, the U.S. Department of Labor reported that restaurant jobs represent 7 out of the 10 lowest paying jobs. So year after year, the DOL puts out the 10 lowest paying jobs, and 7 of those 10 are in the restaurant industry. 4 of the 7 are tipped occupation, even after you take tips into account. And the reason why we even have a subminimum wage for tipped workers is because the National Restaurant Association, what we call the other NRA, is led by big chains and is lobbied to keep the federal minimum wage at $2.13 for tipped workers, and of course $7.25 for non-tipped workers. And the other NRA has been around since emancipation, when it demanded the right to hire newly freed slaves and pay them nothing and let them work off tips. And that idea was made into law in 1938 with the first minimum wage law. Everyone got the minimum wage except tipped workers, who were given $0 as long as the tips brought them up to the full minimum wage. And since 1938, that's over 80 years, the tipped worker wage has gone from $0 to a whopping $2.13. Now, who are tipped workers today? Today, almost 70% of tipped workers in the U.S. are women. A third of them are single moms. With tips, workers on average make a little over $10 an hour. Now, depending on your state, that might be minimum wage, that might not. And the women tipped workers suffer from almost 3 times the poverty rate of the rest of the U.S. workforce. And they use food stamps at 2 times the rate of the U.S. workforce. And worst off, the restaurant industry has the highest rates of sexual harassment of any other industry. And that's because it forces mostly female workforce to tolerate inappropriate customer behavior to feed their families in tips. Now, if you think about, for those of us who have worked in restaurants, that as a server, that the manager has power over your take-home income, because everybody around you in the restaurant has power over your take-home income. The manager can schedule you for good shifts or bad shifts. The host can sit a large party in your section or not. The back of house can burn your food, delay your food, give you dirty dishes. All of this dynamic is determining, everybody else in the restaurant has influence over the women's take-home pay. And when you know that the majority of our workforce are women, and you're telling them, well, you're only going to get $2 from your employer, and the rest you got to make up in tips, that's legislated pay inequity. Now, there are 7 states who are already doing it differently. Right? California, Oregon, Washington, Nevada, Montana, Minnesota, and Alaska have one fair wage. They've required employers to pay all their workers a full minimum wage plus tips for decades. And when California, Seattle, Minneapolis, and St. Paul raised their wage to $15, they didn't leave tipped workers behind. They included tipped workers. And, you know, the other NRA will cry wolf, right? They'll say, oh, if I have to pay my workers the full minimum wage, we're going to go out of business, right? You're going from a $0 wage from a $2.13 to $0, so it's better if we just keep you low. Well, there are restaurants in California, right? There are restaurants in Las Vegas. And they're doing it right. And not only do these states stand, you know, for their values, but restaurant sales per capita are higher. They have higher job growth among restaurant workers and tipped occupations. They have the same or higher rates of tipping. And most importantly, as it also relates to this bill, those states with one fair wage have half the rate of sexual harassment in the restaurant industry. And that's because in those states, a woman can say, enough. I know what I'm going to make at the end of my shift. I don't have to put up with this. You need to leave my restaurant right now, right? And there's a lot of momentum for one fair wage. In addition to the Raise the Wage Act in Congress, which addresses the $15 wage, we have, you know, this bill also being introduced that includes one fair wage. And so one fair wage isn't just an economic justice issue. It's not just about a minimum wage. It's about gender justice. It's about harassment at work. It's about the power for women to control their careers and to say, to budget for your family. Think about that. You know, restaurant workers don't know how much they're going to make. And so when there is a lot of momentum, we have 16 states that introduce one fair wage bills in their sessions. And this momentum couldn't come fast enough because President Trump's Department of Labor recently rescinded a federal regulation that protects enforcement of the tipping rule. So we have an opportunity to be on the right side of history here with this bill, and with your help with mobilizing and getting engaged on this. Eliminating a legacy of slavery is the future of the restaurant industry and women in the workforce. Paying women equal wages is a future and obligation to women in the workforce, and $15 and one fair wage included in this bill is the future. So I hope you all are as excited as I am about this bill. That's it for me, Emma.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. That was great. So I'm going to go through some of the other parts that are in the bill, but you'll, the common theme throughout is that all people should be able to live and work under safe conditions and with dignity. And the common theme throughout this bill is that we're making structural changes to make sure that that is true for all people, no matter where they work or what they do. Unfortunately, right now, our country's anti-harassment laws only cover workplaces with 15 or more employees. So that's actually leaving out millions of people across this country. So millions of people across this country are not covered by our federal anti-harassment laws. And who that mainly is, that's people like nannies, home care workers, house cleaners, farm workers, a lot of people who aren't, who are, there are workplaces that are 15 or less employees, but a lot of times with nannies, home care workers, house cleaners, you could be the only person in a house. And that makes you even more vulnerable to sexual harassment. The majority of the people in these jobs that we're talking about, again, are women of color and immigrant women. Like I said, jobs like this in isolated environments are already more vulnerable. Closing this loophole would go a really long way towards changing this. Any gold standard legislation will close the loopholes to make sure workplace sexual violence, all forms of discrimination and retaliation are against the law in every workplace, no exceptions. And this bill will do that, and it'll cover these workers that I mentioned, and independent contractors, interns, fellows, volunteers, trainees, really making sure everybody is protected. Some other, so we're not going to go as much in depth, but just some other things that folks should know that are important things that need to happen that are going to be covered are the bill will expand workplace protections to cover discrimination against LGBTQ workers so making that, solidifying that in the law. Provide resources to assist employers in preventing and addressing harassment, including model policies and trainings, industry-specific best practices and model workplace climate surveys to continue to be improving on the workplace climate. Another thing is, another big issue is mandatory arbitration. This bill would prohibit mandatory arbitration and overly broad non-disclosure agreements and setting up criteria for NDAs from disputes. And that sounds like a lot of like, really legalistic terms, but overly broad NDAs are really what allowed a lot of these big companies to keep settling harassment cases over and over again, keeping it secret, and then keeping these people on staff. So that's been in the news lately a lot with me too. And when we're talking about higher profile people, like that's exactly what Fox did for Bill O'Reilly. But it's not just happening in those cases. Oftentimes when employees are forced to sign overly broad non-disclosure agreements, they feel like they can't speak out about sexual harassment or an environment of harassment in the workplace because they're worried about these non-disclosure agreements. The bill also provides grants for preventing and addressing harassment and employment discrimination, including grants for legal assistance to low-income workers to be able to actually have access to having access to the accountability and justice that comes with some of these protections. So so much more. I think the last point that I'll make is this is a huge package that is taking on some of the structural problems in our workplace and making the changes we need to cement the culture change that has been happening. So next, I'm sure folks are wondering, so what happens now? What happens next? And you may be wondering, do these people actually think the sexual predator in the White House is going to sign this bill? And that's a really good question. That's not, the basic answer is no, but the more important answer is that we have a plan to win. So even when a bill is not going to become law the first year, it's important to start organizing on it to lay the groundwork. This is how we introduce bold new ideas into our politics. So folks are probably familiar now with the Green New Deal or Medicare for All. So those aren't ideas that are being introduced with the idea that it'll be passed right away. It's being introduced to introduce big ideas that are going to move us into the place that we need to be. And this bill is going to be a package of solutions that are lifted up as what people really need. So the first step is that the bill will be introduced this upcoming Tuesday, April 9th. And the introduction is happening right before, the introduction is happening right before members of Congress are back in their districts for 2 weeks. So this is really the perfect opportunity to talk to them about the bill and start building momentum for these solutions. And so through the end of this year, we can continue to build momentum in Congress and around the country. I mentioned before that we have more women in the House than ever, and we finally have a majority of Democrats in the House. So we could particularly build momentum around this bill by passing it through the House this year. And doing that work will cement the solutions in the bill as a priority. We can also measure our success on this front. Measure our success in terms of making it a big priority by pushing presidential candidates to add this to their platform. We can take pieces of this package of solutions and start moving it in state legislatures as well. But essentially, by raising the profile of the solutions and cementing them as a priority, we're setting ourselves up to pass the bill as soon as the aforementioned sexual predator in the White House is voted out. So that's the broad strokes of the plan and where we're headed.
Cool. Thank you so much, Emma and Diana. That was a great overview of background and what's in the bill and sort of the process and timeline for how we might win on this piece of legislation. So now, before we talk about some of the concrete things that you can all actually do in the near future to start, moving this forward and making this bill a reality, we just wanted to open it up for a few questions. So we're curious if you have any question at all over any of the things that we've gone over thus far on the call. Go ahead and just press 1 on your phone now, and we will call on a few folks. All right, I see a few folks chiming in. Perfect. All right, let's go first to Sophia in Maryland. Sophia, go for it. You have the mic.
Yes. I was curious about, so when it comes to contractors, I'm not sure if I caught it. So they're going to be part of this bill as well?
Emma,
yeah,
do you want to take
that?
that?
I was on mute. Sorry, yes.
Cool.
Yeah, well, yes, the purpose is to basically, the idea is that every worker will be covered with anti-harassment protections. So, yeah, the contractors would be covered as well, independent contractors.
Cool, thank you. All right, we have another question from Shirley in Georgia. Shirley, go for it. You have the mic.
Yes, you indicated you're unable to identify the bill number. Can you tell who's sponsoring this bill at this time?
It's a good question. We wanted to give you guys as much information as we could to get everyone ready because since the bill is being introduced right before April recess, but so I can't, but we will. You'll know on Tuesday. Basically.
Okay. All right.
Good question. Good question. Yeah. Thank you. All right. Let's see here. Let's go to Nadia in Ohio. Nadia, you have the mic.
Hi, just wanted to ask, what are some of the most helpful things that activists can do to aid your amazing work around workplace harassment? Is there any way that we can collaborate?
I wasn't sure if you were going to take that one, right?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. Obviously, there's, I'm excited to hear that that's where your mind is thinking, because that's what we're going to start talking about next, at least in the near term. So, April recess is coming up. I think it's like 4 days after this bill is going to be introduced next week. And so we have a couple of things that we'll talk about that folks can do over the April recess. But I think, too, as Emma mentioned earlier, this is very much going to be sort of like a long-term, plan and a long-term campaign, similar to like Green New Deal and Medicare for All. So I'm sure that over the course of the next couple of years, as we're continuing to build momentum, there's going to be lots and lots of opportunities for things folks can do. Emma, I don't know if you have any more to say.
Oh yeah,
on
I
that,
thought you were just going to say we do have immediate next steps for you that we're about to. That's the next part of the call. So it's a very good segue.
Perfect.
Thank you for that. And then let's go to Norman in Illinois. Norman, go for it. You have the mic.
Yeah, I was just, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Sorry, I heard somebody calling in at the same time. Yeah, I was just wondering what's the best way to start doing something on a more regular basis? I mean, I see these calls come in once, whenever something's going on. But if I wanted to start something locally, I just don't really know how to really get engaged. Where to start?
Yeah, that is a really great question. I will say, in terms of building up local infrastructure and local activist groups, to work on either this or any of the other efforts that Ultraviolet works on or that Rock works on. I'll say, at least from an Ultraviolet perspective, we don't have a ton of capacity at this moment to focus a lot on building up that local infrastructure. Sort of as you gleaned, a lot of the things and opportunities that we have are sort of one-off things, joining this call, or again, as we sort of tease, we're about to talk about what you can be doing locally over the April recess in a couple of weeks here. One thing I would say, at least in terms of advice, is maybe just doing a little bit of research. I know that there are so many great groups that do local work and real on the ground local organizing with local chapters, who have regular meetings, who do also work on a lot of these issues as well. So it maybe suggest searching on Google, maybe looking on Facebook for other progressive local activist groups that you can turn to. I don't know, Emma or Diana, if either of you have thoughts on that as well, please chime in.
Yeah, this is Diana with Rock. So Rock has chapters across the country. We have about 13 chapters, and maybe we can circulate that after this call. If you happen to live in one of those cities, you can get involved. But also like Ryan was saying, there maybe we can also not just a list of Rock chapters, but other local organizations who are leading this work right on the ground, because I think it's very important to continue the drumbeat. Because it's not just about, I think the question really lifts up the need for not just being on top of the legislation and knowing what's happening and doing the wonky stuff. That's very important, right? And that's what folks in the DC bubble are focused on. But we have to couple that with actions on the ground. And I think we're going to be segueing into that discussion in a few minutes. But how to keep that drumbeat going and how to show legislators that this is a demand from people on the ground, right? This is what the community wants and the community is demanding, and so that they don't just forget, a year from now, 2 years from now, we introduce this legislation, let's keep going until we get it, right? Maybe it's not just this session. Maybe it'll take, 2 or 4 sessions from now. Whatever the thing is that, big movements weren't won, overnight, or definitely in a congressional session. And so I think the question, the last 2 questions are really focused on how can we keep the drumbeat going. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but also maybe it'd be helpful if we follow up after over email with maybe some suggested local organizations. Would that make sense, Emma and Ryan?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Well, thank you for all the information.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I'll just well, the last thing I'll say is I am excited. Everything obviously that they said, yes. And in the movement on ending sexual violence, I am really excited about the potential for these bold solutions to act as a North Star for folks to start to mobilize and take conversations into political action on this issue in particular, and to, as Diana was saying, keep that drumbeat going on this issue specifically. So wanted to give that framing a little bit before Ryan dives into some next steps.
Great. Well, that was all great. Thank you so much for all those great questions. If we didn't get to yours yet, don't worry. We will have more time at the end of this section as well to go over some questions. All right, so we're going to keep moving forward. In this final section, we just wanted to touch base on a couple of different things that you can do, again, in the near future to really put this on your member of Congress's radar and make sure that they actually start taking this bill seriously. So just for some context for folks who don't know, Congress is going on a 2-week recess, as I mentioned, starting next Friday, April 12th, and it's going all the way through Sunday, April 28th. So recess is when members of Congress have a break from D.C. Many of them travel back to their home states and their home districts. Many of them use it as an opportunity to hear directly from their constituents about, like what matters most to them. And they'll often take what they hear during the recesses back to D.C. And they use that knowledge to sort of, inform their platforms and how they'll vote moving forward. So naturally, the upcoming April recess, which again is happening 4 days or so after the bill is being introduced, it's really the perfect time to take this to your member of Congress. So I just wanted to go over two different types of options for what you can be doing over the April recess to support this bill. I'll also mention that we will be sending around a toolkit to all of you in the next few days as well with all of this information too. So definitely keep a lookout for that for some more in-depth stuff in writing. But the first tactic that I want to talk with you all about is attending town halls and public appearances by your member of Congress over the April recess. So it's not uncommon for members of Congress to schedule public appearances for constituents over congressional recesses. So whether it's, an actual town hall, which is a more formal public forum to actually hear from constituents, answer questions, disperse information on timely topics, or even if it's just regular photo op type appearances around your community. Both of these are really great opportunities to approach your member of Congress and publicly ask them about this new bill and sort of, try to get them on record. So the first thing that you want to do is actually find out if your member of Congress actually has any town halls or public appearances scheduled over the upcoming April recess. And there are a few key places to look. The first is a really great resource called the Town Hall Project, which is at townhallproject.com. So this is a crowdsourced platform that allows folks to share information that they hear about when and where their member of Congress might be appearing, especially over recesses. Other places to look include your representative's website. You can also call their in-district office directly and just simply ask if the representative is going to be making any public appearances for constituents over the recess. And then lastly, you should definitely join your representative's email list and follow them on their social media accounts because oftentimes they'll make announcements about their scheduled appearances on those platforms before anywhere else. Once you know when and where to show up, the next step is to just figure out what you're going to say and actually practice it. So when you're asking them about this bill at a public forum, you definitely want to mention a few key things. You'll want to mention first the name of the bill, what the bill actually does, and then ask directly whether or not they support it or if they would even consider co-sponsoring it. So again, we'll send out a toolkit later with all of this information in the next couple of days, including, as Emma mentioned, the exact name of the bill once it's announced. But I just wanted to put sort of like a sample question here that kind of gets at all those parts. So, a good question to ask would be something to the effect of, last week on April 9th, a bill was introduced called blank. This bill is the gold standard for taking harassment on in the workplace. It mandates one fair wage for all workers so that no one has to put up with harassment just to make a minimum wage. It ensures anti-harassment laws cover all workers, and it expands workplace protections to cover discrimination against LGBTQ workers. Is this a bill that you would support, or would you even consider co-sponsoring it? So that's a type of question that you could ask directly in either a town hall or public appearance type setting. Then you basically just wait for their response, and that's all there is to it. The last thing that you want to make sure that you do, if you can, is to get the interaction on film. So this will provide a real level of accountability. We can share that video on social media and use it to inform fellow constituents of your representative's position, and ultimately, hold them accountable to what they shared with you, whether or not it was a yes or a no or a maybe. So getting it on film is really key. So lastly, for this section for town halls and public appearances, I just wanted to give 4 quick tips to make sure that you maximize your chances of success if you're approaching this tactic. So the first tip that I have for you is to make sure to show up early so that you're in a spot that's visible and you can easily be called on. This is especially important for those more like informal public appearance type events where there might not be like a proper queue for constituents to ask questions or things like that. My second tip for you is to not wear anything that's too partisan or political, especially if your representative is of the opposite party, because it will likely decrease the chances that they'll actually want to approach you or that you'll get called on to even ask a question. My third tip for you is to be polite. So we just want to be clear that, by the time that April recess begins in a week and a half, this bill is going to be very, very brand new. It will just have been introduced, so it's really likely that some members of Congress might not even have heard of the bill yet. And so you just want to make sure that your tone is not coming off as menacing in any type of way, and it's more so, communicating your passion. And then my last tip is to bring friends. So the more people that you have with you who are also prepared to ask the same question, the better likelihood that you'll have the actual opportunity to get it answered. So I always encourage folks to bring friends, make sure that everybody that you bring is prepared to ask the same question, and also make sure that everyone is prepared to film the interaction if anyone in your group gets the opportunity to ask. Okay, so that is one way that you can fight for this bill over the upcoming April recess. The next option that I want to talk to folks about is the possibility of doing an in-district meeting. So in-district meetings can take a little bit more work to pull off, but the payoff can be huge. So one reason you might want to consider organizing an in-district meeting is that it's likely that only a small percentage of members of Congress will actually be holding public appearances over this upcoming recess. But on the flip side, every single member of Congress's office will take in-district meetings from constituents. So that's one. And then two, just because of the nature of an in-district meeting, right, where you're actually sitting down with a staff member and a small group of your constituents that you've recruited, you're all sharing personal stories. You just have an opportunity to have a more robust and intimate conversation about your positions. This setting can actually leave a very strong impression on your representative and their staff. So I would definitely encourage anyone whose representative doesn't have an upcoming public appearance to try to plan an in-district meeting sometime in the next few weeks instead. So I'm going to break this in terms of like the how-to down into 3 different sections. The first is what you should do before your meeting. The second is what you should do during your meeting. And the last is what you should do after your meeting. So first, before your meeting, the first thing that you want to do is you're going to want to recruit people. The ideal number of people to bring to an in-district meeting is usually around 3 to 6 folks. That's including yourself. So in the week leading up to your in-district meeting, you should spend some time talking to your friends and family members and any other constituents that live in your district who might care about this issue, and just see if they're interested in going to meet with your member of Congress's local office. It's a really good idea to invite people who have some kind of personal connection to this issue, whether it's someone who maybe works in the restaurant industry or service industry, maybe someone who has experienced workplace harassment in the past, maybe someone who the Me Too movement has really impacted. Just think of folks who can speak to this fight on a really personal level. Once you have a group of folks who are interested, the next thing to do is make an appointment. So this is really just as simple as picking up the phone and calling their local office and just asking to be put on the schedule to talk to your member of Congress or a legislative aide about this new bill. The person on the other line might tell you that, you need to fill out an online form, or they might say that maybe they say they don't have like too much time in the next few weeks. All that's fine. My advice to you, and the most important thing here, is to just be really persistent. Because eventually, if you call enough times and if you write enough times over the course of a week or two, you'll very likely be put on the schedule to actually come in with your group. And if for some reason, that really does not work and the local office is being completely non-responsive, as a last-ditch resort, you can also just sort of show up with your group during normal business hours and just request a meeting on the spot. Once you have your meeting scheduled, you'll want to draft an agenda. So with your group members, you should think about developing an agenda for how you want the meeting to go, what you want to talk about, and who will speak when. You should definitely look over some talking points, and we'll include those in the toolkit. And just think about any personal anecdotes that folks would like to share. And then the last thing you want to do before your meeting is just practice and prepare. So, definitely try to meet with your group at least once before the meeting. If not in person, then at least over the phone. And I really recommend having everybody go around the circle at least once and just, practice what you're actually going to say. And then if, you're going to bring any printed materials, like any news articles that support your position, get those ready and print those out as well. So that's what you should focus on from now until the time of the meeting. Next, I want to talk about some things that you should do during your meeting. And the first of those things is to make sure that you stay on message. So I know that it can be really tempting to talk about a lot of different issues, right? Like, there's lots of stuff to be angry about right now. But honestly, I would say that you're more likely to get good results if you just stay focused on the one issue of harassment in the workplace and how you feel like, this new bill can really help curb it. And then at some point in the meeting, probably near the end, you'll want to actually make a clear ask. So something like, will Representative X support this new bill to curb workplace harassment? Making a clear ask like this will show the person that you're meeting with that you are prepared to hold them accountable. And just know that if you're talking to a legislative aide or something, they might not be able to answer you right away, and that's totally fine. They might say that they need to check with the representative or that they need to do research. Just let them know that you plan to follow up. And then once your meeting's over, a few quick things that you should do. The first, this is really huge, is to take a picture. And I always say to folks, please send it to us. We would love to hear about how your meeting went. We would love to be able to share your story with folks online. Examples of good photos include, a big group photo in front of the office, even a photo maybe with a staff member that you met with if they oblige. The second thing is to say thank you. So make sure you get the business card of the person that you meet with and just send them a thank you email afterward that, again, reiterates your position and repeats the questions for your member of Congress. And then the last thing that you want to do is just follow up. So again, the odds are good that you might not get a clear answer during the actual meeting. So you should definitely check in a week later to see if they've arrived at a firm answer. You can do this either by phone or email or both. So that's the how-to. 3 super quick tips for success. My first tip for you is to ditch partisanship. So this is a really big one. Whether or not you agree with your member of Congress on other issues or, even their political party, you should really try to keep the conversation away from party politics and instead focus really squarely on the positive impact that this particular bill will make. You'll just get way better results if the staff member feels like you're approaching the meeting with no preconceived notions about party affiliations. My second tip for you is to get personal. Stats and facts and figures, those things are all fine too. But honestly, personal stories from constituents are really going to go much further in terms of moving your elected official to actually take action. I always tell folks, you want to make sure that the person that you're meeting with remembers you and your stories and not the facts and the figures that you tell them. And then my last tip is that remember, it's okay to not know everything. So, you should definitely do your homework, but it's totally fine if you're asked a question that you don't know the answer to. Just say that you don't know, and instead direct the conversation back to your personal concerns and the things that you do know. After the meeting, if you like, you can always look up anything you didn't know and follow up with them over email. But honestly, I always tell folks to just remember that you do not need to be an expert on any of this stuff to go into your elected official's office and share your opinions with them. Okay, so that's a little bit of info on types of things that you can do over the recess. And next, I'm just curious, I would love to do another quick poll. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being not very interested and 5 being very interested, let me know on your phone how you're feeling about the possibility of either trying to attend a public appearance or a town hall by your representative over the April recess, or maybe organizing an Indistrict meeting. Don't worry, this is definitely not binding by any means. I'm just sort of curious how folks are feeling right now after everything that we've gone over today about the possibility of maybe working on this in the next few weeks. So again, on your phone, press 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 just to indicate, your level of interest at this point in time. Cool. All right, it seems like most people on the line are at the 4 and 5 range. That's really great. That's really exciting to see. Okay, so that's all we have. I just wanted to quickly wrap up, go over some next steps, and then I want to just open it back up for questions or any comments or good examples from folks. So again, just to go over next steps, tomorrow we will send you a recording of this presentation along with the slides so that you can go back and listen to anything that you might have missed. Early next week, we will send out a toolkit about April recess with more information about this bill and a review of all the things that we went over in terms of like taking action, either like showing up at a public appearance or doing an in-district meeting. On Tuesday, April 9th, getting a little bit ahead of myself, the bill will be coming out officially, and we'll have the name of the bill, and we can share that with you all at that point. And then after that, over the next few weeks, we will continue to follow up with folks, primarily over email, just to sort of continue gauging interest and start helping you plan and organize actions to help this new bill make a splash in these first few weeks. Okay, so with that, let's take some questions. So I'm going to clear all the numbers. So if you have a question right now or a comment or example or anything, please press 1 again on your phone, and we will call on some folks. Great. Have a couple questions already. First, let's see here. Let's go to Ali Yama in New York. I hope I said that correctly, but you have the mic.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, and you said my name right. This is Ali Yama, and my question is, and maybe it might be a little bit premature, but I was wondering how employers would be held accountable or in compliance for this bill. And I ask that because, just being familiar with the work of ROC, I know one of the things that you do is really to also recruit high road employers, which, gives people an idea of what that some of the counter arguments that have been used around the tip minimum wage has been that it will destroy small businesses, and to have like very positive models of how businesses weren't destroyed by eliminating the tip minimum wage was, I think, very vital to winning the elimination of the tip minimum wage. So I'm wondering, is it a similar model to that, or how are we thinking of that response that we might get from legislators that say that this would be harmful for business? Thank you.
Yeah. I'll answer that. This is Diana with ROC. So, yes, Aliyam, I think that it's very important to have small business owners also engaged in this fight because, unfortunately, as we all know, the business argument sometimes, most often wins, right? And business owners and this, crying wolf that we're going to go out of business is what too often sways legislators towards, their way, right? And against workers and against stopping harassment and against women in the workplace. And so you're right that we're going to have some of our high road employers be represented in this fight and having those meetings. But it's very important for ROC to have workers and women of color lead this fight, right? And our high road employers be supportive of them and stand behind the women and say, yes, I'm here to support my workers. Yes, I'm here to say that what she's saying is right and that I'm not going to go out of business and that we can afford it. And frankly, it's better for business. It's a good business model, right? I do better when I treat, my workers well and I'm making sure that they're not getting harassed on the job. And so that is going to be very important for us in terms of the tip minimum wage piece. And I imagine that other organizations that are more focused on harassment at work, we're going to bring maybe employers who have more experiences with not just the tip minimum wage, right, but being able to defend the bill and the policies in the bill from other employer perspectives, I guess I'm trying to say. And so from ROC, yes, we're going to bring restaurant workers to the forefront, and then I guess I'll let Emma and Ryan respond to what kind of other employers. But I think you're absolutely right that we're going to have the small business voice in this.
Yeah, I don't have a ton more to add to what you said. I think there's definitely already a lot of thought going into how small business owners are going to be organized as a constituency to advocate for the bill, to push back on, any expected pushback. Pushback on the pushback.
Yeah, and I can think of, Futures Without Violence, the National Partnership, the National Women's Law Center, Ultraviolet, of course, ROC, and Businesses for a Fair Minimum Wage. All of those advocacy organizations have organized business owners before, and have business owners on our list of members. And so I think we'll all really, be focused on uplifting those voices.
Great. Thank you so much for that question. Next, let's go to Pepper in California. Pepper, go for it. You have the mic.
Hi.
Hi. Yes.
Okay. So I was wondering, because like how we have town hall and everyone can see what their representative is doing as far as town hall there. There was a website also called protest.com or .org, and it kind of got disbanded when everyone started protesting, which is curious, but either way, that's what happened. But my thing is in that same kind of vein, right? People, it makes an impact when you go to the Capitol and you talk to your legislators, right? And if no one knows about like these especially impactful bills, like the one that you're talking about now, there was a bill that they're trying to push through in the Arizona legislature around voting rights. These bills everywhere about kind of just incrementally getting rid of abortion rights and things like that. If there was a website kind of like Town Hall, kind of like protest.org, that kind of gave like, it's like up to the minute, but there's a different phrase for it, but like real time uploading of when Congress was going to have, legislation or have like be talking about certain issues, like kind of making it categorized so that people could go and speak to Congress if they had like a day off, because these things happen during the week, right? And unless we're with an organized organization like yourself or something that we're doing local, like I'm with California Clean, and there's also Missouri Clean, but unless we're with those organizations, we're not going to have insight when these important and revolutionary bills are being discussed by our leaders. But if there was a website, if there was a place that kind of categorized like this bill around abortion legislation or women's rights legislation, this bill around not having corrupt government, and then it did it locally and it did it nationally, right? So if people were living in Washington, they could go and speak there. And if people were living in Sandusky, Ohio, they could go and speak with the legislators there when they were, going kind of like a last minute thing. Oh my gosh, I'm going to be off Thursday anyway. I should go and speak to my government because I want minimum wage workers to have the same wage as everybody else. I don't want to have to take horrible behavior so that I can feed my family, right?
I think that's a great idea. Yeah, like sort of to put it like what I'm sort of hearing is like how to make the DC and even like state, like legislative process more accessible to more people. Because I think you're right. It does oftentimes very much happen in a bubble, and lots of times things will come and go, bad things will get passed, and there's like not very much like hoopla, about it. And so, yeah, I think that sounds like a great idea. I think you could launch a whole organization like that just to make the whole legislative process more accessible to lay people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. That was great. All right, we have one other question, and then we will wrap up because I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. We'll go to Shirley in Georgia. Shirley, go for it. You have the mic.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I agree with the young lady before in terms of making the process more participatory, particularly before the bill is introduced or enacted. And my question is to a follow-up to Ariana's in New York. Would it be more advantageous to also push the Equal Rights Amendment, which includes equal pay, which also includes a monitoring and enforcement mechanism for workers for pay and enforcement?
I think,
That's a good question. Yeah, go ahead, Emma.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's definitely both and. I think there's some specific big solutions in here, particularly like one fair wage that we want to be lifting up, but I think it's a both and. I think we should definitely be advocating for both.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to share that in terms of legislative advocacy for both of them because they complement each other. Thank you.
Totally, yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, and with that, I think that concludes our call. Real quick before we all hop off, just want to do a plug for a feedback survey. We would really love to know what you all thought of this training. So afterwards, if you can go to weareultraviolet.org/survey and fill out a super brief list of like a few questions, that would really help us in our ongoing training efforts to make sure that we're bringing the best content and trainings to all of you. And yeah, with that, on behalf of all the trainers, I just want to say thank you so much for joining. This is really great and robust call, and I'm super excited to continue working with all of you over the next few weeks and months and certainly years to make this great piece of legislation a reality.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Great. Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye.